Sometimes the smallest gesture can unlock the deepest secrets. In the sterile halls of Walter Reed Medical Center, where wounded warriors come to heal, one young nurse discovered that knowing the right words could mean the difference between life and death. This isn't just a story about medical care. It's about brotherhood, trust, and the invisible bonds that tie elite soldiers together even when they're broken and far from the battlefield. What happens when a Navy SEAL refuses all treatment, pushing away every doctor and nurse who tries to help? What happens when his silence threatens not just his own life, but the safety of his team still deployed overseas? And what happens when a rookie nurse, fresh out of training, somehow knows the one thing that could save him? A secret identifier that shouldn't exist outside the most classified military circles. This is the true story of Marcus Rodriguez, a decorated Navy SEAL who came home from Afghanistan carrying more than just physical wounds, and Sarah Chun, a 23-year-old nurse who would risk everything to break through his walls of silence. Their encounter would expose a network of secrets, test the limits of medical ethics, and prove that sometimes the most unlikely people hold the keys to salvation. The ambulance pulled up to Walter Reed Medical Center at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning in October. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of Washington, D.C. traffic. Inside the vehicle, a man lay strapped to a gurney, his eyes wide open but staring at nothing. His chart read Marcus Rodriguez, 32 years old, Navy SEAL Team 6. The injuries listed were extensive: 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, shrapnel wounds across his left shoulder and back, and a concussion that had left him unconscious for 18 hours. But it wasn't the physical wounds that worried the paramedics. It was the silence. Marcus hadn't spoken a single word since they'd pulled him from the helicopter at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Not during the 14-hour flight back to the States, not during the transfer from Andrews Air Force Base, and not even when the pain medication had worn off somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. The doctors in Germany had noted his vital signs were stable. His responses to physical stimuli were normal, but something was very wrong with the man inside the broken body. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the head of the trauma unit, met the gurney at the emergency bay doors. She was a veteran of military medicine, having spent 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan before returning to Walter Reed. She'd seen thousands of wounded soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines come through these doors. She knew the look in their eyes, the way they carried themselves, the subtle signs that separated those who would heal quickly from those who might never fully recover. One glance at Marcus Rodriguez told her this would be complicated. "What's his story?" she asked the lead paramedic as they wheeled him toward the trauma bay. "Classified mission in Afghanistan. IED explosion, but there's more to it." His team leader called ahead, said he might be resistant to treatment. Something about operational security. Dr. Harrison nodded. It wasn't uncommon for special operations soldiers to be cautious about sharing information, even with medical personnel. The nature of their work often meant that even their injuries could reveal sensitive details about ongoing missions. But this felt different. As they transferred Marcus to the hospital bed, Dr. Harrison noticed his hands. They were clenched in a fist so tight that his knuckles had turned white. His jaw was set in a rigid line, and his eyes tracked every person in the room with the calculating precision of a predator assessing threats. When she reached for his wrist to check his pulse, he jerked away with lightning speed, despite his injuries. "Marcus," she said softly, using his first name deliberately. "You're safe here. We're going to take care of you." No response. His eyes fixed on a point just over her left shoulder and stayed there. Dr. Harrison had worked with trauma patients before, both military and civilian. She recognized the signs of post-traumatic stress, the hypervigilance, the emotional withdrawal. But there was something else here, something that felt more like a deliberate choice than an involuntary response to trauma. "Can you tell me where you're hurting?" she tried again. Nothing. The next 6 hours followed a frustrating pattern. Every attempt to engage Marcus in conversation met with stone silence. He allowed the medical staff to treat his physical injuries, barely. When nurses tried to clean his wounds, he watched their every move with suspicious eyes. When doctors explained procedures, he showed no acknowledgement that he'd heard them. When asked about pain levels, allergies, or medical history, he might as well have been carved from marble. Dr. Harrison had dealt with uncooperative patients before, but this was different. Marcus wasn't angry or confused or delirious. He was making a conscious choice not to engage, and that choice seemed absolute. By afternoon, word had spread through the ward about the SEAL who wouldn't talk. The nursing staff tried everything, different approaches, different personalities, even bringing in a military chaplain. Nothing worked. Marcus accepted treatment for his immediate injuries, but refused to participate in any way that might speed his recovery or ensure his long-term health. The breaking point came during the evening shift change. Dr. Harrison was reviewing his chart when Nurse Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran of military medicine, approached with frustration written across her face. "Doctor, he's refusing the antibiotic drip. Just pulls the 4 out every time we insert it. At this rate, infection is going to become a serious risk." Dr. Harrison looked up from the chart. Did he say why? He hasn't said anything to anyone all day. But there's something else. I called his command to get his medical records, and they told me something strange. His team is still deployed. They're in the middle of a classified operation that won't end for another 3 weeks. This stopped Dr. Harrison cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever happened to him over there, his team is still in danger. And maybe he thinks that talking about his injuries might somehow compromise their mission." Dr. Harrison stared at Marcus's chart, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. Special operations soldiers were trained to resist interrogation, to compartmentalize information, to prioritize the mission above all else, including their own welfare. If Marcus believed that discussing his injuries might somehow endanger his team, he would choose to suffer in silence rather than risk their lives. But that presented a medical nightmare. How do you treat a patient who won't tell you what's wrong? How do you monitor recovery when the patient refuses to communicate symptoms? How do you ensure proper healing when the patient actively resists care? As the day shift prepared to leave, Dr. Harrison made a decision that would change everything. She decided to assign the case to the newest member of their nursing staff, someone without preconceived notions about how to handle difficult military patients, someone who might see what the rest of them were missing. Sarah Chun had graduated from nursing school just 4 months earlier. She was 23 years old, brilliant, compassionate, and possessed of an almost supernatural intuition when it came to reading patients. But she had never worked with special operations soldiers before, had never dealt with classified medical situations, and had never encountered a patient quite like Marcus Rodriguez. Dr. Harrison found her in the break room, reviewing files for her upcoming night shift. "Sarah, I have an unusual assignment for you tonight." Sarah looked up, her dark eyes bright with interest. "What kind of unusual?" "Room 314. Navy SEAL, multiple injuries, refusing to communicate with staff. His team is still deployed on a classified mission, and we think he's staying silent to protect them." Sarah closed her file folder. "What's been tried so far?" "Everything. Different doctors, different nurses, chaplain, even brought in a psychiatrist. He's like a statue, accepts minimal treatment, but won't engage beyond that." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking, "What's his name?" "Marcus Rodriguez, 32, Team 6, decorated soldier." "But, Sarah, I need to warn you, this isn't like other difficult patients. There's something deeper going on here, something we don't understand yet." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." What Dr. Harrison didn't know, what no one at Walter Reed knew, was that Sarah Chun had a secret of her own. Her brother David had served 2 tours with Army Special Forces before being killed in Syria 3 years earlier. In the months before his death, David had shared things with his sister that he probably shouldn't have, stories about the brotherhood between elite units, about informal networks that existed outside official channels, about ways that operators from different services stayed connected and looked out for each other. Among those things David had mentioned were recognition codes, informal identifiers that special operations soldiers use to verify each other's credentials when operating in gray areas where official protocols didn't apply. David had made her memorize several of them, claiming it was just military trivia, but Sarah had always suspected there was more to it. As she walked toward room 314 that evening, Sarah found herself thinking about her brother's words. Sometimes the difference between life and death isn't what you know, but who you know. And sometimes it's about proving you're part of the family, even when you're not. Marcus Rodriguez lay in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was dim, lit only by the glow from various medical monitors. His breathing was steady but shallow, his body rigid with pain he refused to acknowledge. When Sarah entered the room, his eyes tracked to her immediately, another threat to assess and categorize. She moved slowly, deliberately, keeping her hands visible. She'd learned from David that special operations soldiers were always watching, always calculating, always ready for the unexpected. "Hello, Marcus," she said softly. "I'm Sarah. I'll be your nurse tonight." No response, as expected. But she noticed something the others had missed, a slight tightening around his eyes when she said his name, as if he was surprised by her directness. Sarah began her routine check of his vital signs, working quietly and efficiently. She didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask questions he wouldn't answer, didn't push for engagement. Instead, she simply did her job with a competence that seemed to relax him slightly. It was when she was adjusting his four-line, the one he'd been pulling out every few hours, that she made her choice. As she secured the tape, she spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Frogman walking backward. Marcus's entire body went rigid. His eyes snapped to hers with an intensity that made her step back involuntarily. For the first time in over 24 hours, he spoke. "What did you hear that?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a dozen questions and twice as many threats. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "My brother David, Army Special Forces. He said it was something Navy SEALs use to identify friendlies in uncertain situations." Marcus studied her face for a long moment, searching for deception, for threat, for any sign that this was some kind of trap. What he saw instead was a young woman with tired eyes and gentle hands, a woman whose expression held both hope and grief. "What happened to your brother?" "Syria. 3 years ago. ID." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something had changed. The walls hadn't come down entirely, but a small window had opened. "Your brother never should have told you that code." "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But he did. And maybe there was a reason." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, thinking. The recognition code was real, an informal identifier used by Navy SEALs when they needed to verify friendly status outside normal channels. Very few people outside the teams knew it, and those who did were either trusted allies or dead. "Why are you here?" he asked finally. "To help you heal." "I can't heal, or won't talk about why you need to heal." Marcus turned his head to look at her directly. "My team is still out there. If I talk about what happened, if I describe my injuries in detail, it might compromise their position. Operation security doesn't stop just because I got hurt." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down beside his bed. "What if I told you that there might be a way to treat you properly without compromising your team's safety?" "I'd say you don't understand how these things work." "Maybe not, but I understand something else. I understand what it's like to lose someone because they put the mission before their own safety. My brother did the same thing you're doing now, suffered in silence to protect others. And maybe that was noble, but it didn't bring him home." Marcus stared at the ceiling again. "This is different, is it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a decorated soldier is choosing to risk his life rather than trust the people who are trying to save it." The room fell silent, except for the soft beeping of monitors. Sarah didn't push, didn't try to fill the silence with words. She simply sat with him, a presence that somehow felt different from all the others who had tried to break through his walls. Finally, Marcus spoke again. "Even if I want to talk, there are things I can't tell you. Things that are classified above your clearance level." "Then, don't tell me those things. Tell me what you can. Help me help you without breaking any rules or endangering anyone." Marcus turned to look at her again. There was something in her eyes, something that reminded him of his own sister back in Texas, something that suggested she understood sacrifice in ways that most people never would. "What's your last name?" he asked suddenly. "Chun." "What?" "David Chun. Army Special Forces. Died in Syria." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew him?" "Not personally, but I know the name. His unit worked with my team on 2 occasions. He was well regarded." Tears formed in Sarah's eyes, but she didn't look away. He would have liked knowing that. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing this new information. The connection felt too convenient to be coincidence, but too specific to be a setup. And something about Sarah's presence felt genuine in a way that cut through his professional paranoia. "If I work with you," he said finally, "there have to be ground rules. There are things I cannot and will not discuss. Period." "Understood." "And everything we talk about stays between us unless it directly impacts my medical treatment." "Agreed." Marcus took a deep breath, wincing as it aggravated his injured ribs. "Then, maybe we can figure this out together." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room. "I think we can." Outside room 314, the night shift continued its rounds, unaware that something important had shifted. Dr. Harrison, reviewing charts in her office, made a note to check on the difficult seal patient in the morning. She had no way of knowing that by morning, everything would be different. As the night wore on, Sarah and Marcus began the delicate process of finding a way forward that honored both his oath to protect his team and her oath to heal her patients. It was a conversation that would last long into the early morning hours, a negotiation between trust and security, between disclosure and protection. And somewhere in Afghanistan, Team 6 continued their mission, unaware that their teammates' recovery had taken a crucial turn thanks to 4 simple words spoken by a nurse who shouldn't have known them. The conversation between Sarah and Marcus stretched through the night like a careful dance, each word measured, each revelation balanced against the weight of operational security. As dawn approached, they had established something that had seemed impossible just hours earlier, a foundation of trust built on shared understanding and mutual respect. Marcus had agreed to provide basic medical information, pain levels, symptom changes, medication reactions, without discussing the specific circumstances of his injuries. Sarah had promised to advocate for his treatment while respecting the boundaries he needed to maintain. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a beginning. When Dr. Harrison arrived for her morning rounds, she found a transformation that left her stunned. Marcus was sitting up in bed, accepting medication without resistance, and responding to direct questions about his comfort level. The change was so dramatic that she initially suspected some kind of medical intervention, perhaps pain medication that had finally taken effect, or a neurological improvement from his concussion. "Good morning, Marcus," Dr. Harrison said, reviewing his overnight chart. "I understand you've been more communicative with the night staff." Marcus glanced at Sarah, who was finishing her documentation at the bedside. "Nurse Chun and I reached an understanding." Dr. Harrison looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't quite grasp. "What kind of understanding?" "The kind that lets me get better without compromising anyone's safety," Marcus replied carefully. Sarah stepped forward. "Dr. Harrison, Marcus has agreed to provide all medically necessary information. He just needs assurance that details about his injuries won't be documented in ways that might be accessible to unauthorized personnel." Dr. Harrison frowned. "Sarah, all medical records are protected by HIPAA regulations. They're not accessible to unauthorized personnel." "Ma'am," Marcus interjected, "with respect, HIPAA doesn't cover military intelligence databases. My medical records will be reviewed by personnel who might use details about my injuries to infer information about ongoing operations. I need to know that sensitive details will be handled appropriately." This was a complication Dr. Harrison had never encountered. In her years of treating military patients, she'd dealt with classified injuries before, but never a situation where the patient himself was actively managing information flow to protect ongoing operations. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Sarah had anticipated this question. During her long conversation with Marcus, They had worked out a system that might satisfy both medical and security requirements. We're suggesting a modified documentation protocol. All medical information gets recorded, but certain details are flagged for restricted access. That's not standard procedure. This isn't a standard patient, Marcus said quietly. Doctor, my team is still in country. They're in active operations that won't conclude for another 3 weeks. Anything that might help enemy forces identify our location, our tactics, or our capabilities puts them at risk. Dr. Harrison sat down, processing this information. She was a physician first, but she was also a former military officer who understood the weight of operational security. The challenge was finding a way to provide proper medical care while respecting legitimate security concerns. What specifically are you worried about? She asked. Marcus looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. This was the moment they had prepared for, the test of whether their new partnership could actually work in practice. The pattern of my injuries could reveal details about the type of explosive device used, which could indicate enemy capabilities. The location of shrapnel wounds might suggest our positioning during the incident, which could compromise future operations in that area. Even my recovery timeline might be used to infer when my team might be rotated out. Dr. Harrison was impressed despite herself. She had never thought about medical information from an intelligence perspective, but Marcus's concerns were logical and specific. And you think you can provide medical information without revealing these details? I think we can find a way to give you what you need to treat me, while protecting what needs to be protected, Marcus replied. What followed was the most unusual medical consultation of Dr. Harrison's career. Instead of a standard patient interview, it became a collaborative editing session where Marcus provided detailed information about his symptoms and pain levels while carefully avoiding specifics that might compromise security. Sarah served as translator, helping Dr. Harrison understand what information was medically necessary and helping Marcus frame his responses in ways that provided that information without crossing security lines. The process was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it worked. By the end of their first session, Dr. Harrison had enough information to adjust Marcus's treatment plan, optimize his pain management, and address complications that hadn't been apparent from his initial examination. More importantly, Marcus began to trust the process. For the first time since his injury, he felt like he could participate in his own recovery without betraying his oath to protect his teammates. As the days passed, this new approach began to yield remarkable results. Marcus's physical recovery accelerated as he became an active participant in his treatment. His pain levels improved as he felt comfortable reporting symptoms. His psychological state stabilized as the constant tension between healing and security began to resolve. But the success brought new challenges. Other staff members noticed the change in Marcus's cooperation and began asking questions. Some were suspicious of Sarah's methods, wondering what she had done differently. Others were curious about the modified documentation procedures that had been implemented for his case. Dr. Harrison found herself in the position of protecting both Marcus's privacy and Sarah's unconventional approach. She couldn't explain the specific breakthrough without revealing details that Marcus had shared in confidence. But she needed to justify the departure from standard procedures to hospital administration. The situation became more complicated when Colonel James Mitchell, Marcus's commanding officer, arrived for an unscheduled visit. Mitchell was a career special operations officer who had worked with Marcus's unit for over a decade. He was also someone who understood the delicate balance between medical care and operational security. "Doctor," he said after introducing himself to Dr. Harrison, "I need to understand what's happening with my soldier. 2 days ago, he was completely uncommunicative. Now I'm hearing he's actively participating in treatment. What changed?" Dr. Harrison chose her words carefully. He established a rapport with one of our nurses, someone who understood his concerns about operational security. Colonel Mitchell's eyes narrowed. What concerns specifically? He was worried that details about his injuries might compromise his team's ongoing mission. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, thinking. Marcus's concerns were valid. Special operations soldiers were trained to think about information security even when wounded. But Complete refusal of medical care wasn't an acceptable solution. "I need to speak with him," Mitchell said finally. When Colonel Mitchell entered room 314, he found Marcus sitting up in bed, alert and engaged in a way that hadn't been possible during his previous visits. Sarah was checking his bandages, and their interaction was professional but comfortable, the kind of working relationship that develops between patients and caregivers who trust each other. "Marcus," Mitchell said, "you look better." "I feel better, sir. Getting proper treatment makes a difference." "So I've heard." "Want to tell me what changed?" Marcus glanced at Sarah, then back at his commanding officer. "I found someone I could trust with the information, sir. Someone who understands both sides of the equation." Mitchell looked at Sarah with new interest. "And you are?" "Sarah Chun, sir. Night shift nurse." The name meant nothing to Mitchell initially, but something in her bearing caught his attention. She held herself with a confidence that seemed unusual for someone so young, and her eyes held a depth that suggested personal experience with military culture. "Have we met before?" he asked. "No, sir. But you might have known my brother. David Chun, Army Special Forces." Mitchell's expression shifted. He didn't know that name, not personally, but by reputation. David Chun had been killed during a classified operation in Syria, an operation that had involved coordination between multiple special operations units. "Your brother was a good soldier," Mitchell said quietly. "Thank you, sir." Mitchell studied her for a moment longer, then turned back to Marcus. "So, you're comfortable with the current arrangement?" "Yes, sir. I'm getting the care I need without compromising operational security. And the medical staff is satisfied with your cooperation?" "Dr. Harrison seems pleased with my progress." Mitchell nodded. The situation was unusual, but it was working. Marcus was healing. The medical team was satisfied, and security concerns were being addressed. From a command perspective, it was the best possible outcome. But as he prepared to leave, Mitchell had one more question for Sarah. "Nurse Chun, how exactly did you convince my soldier to open up?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I used something my brother taught me, sir. Sometimes you have to prove your family before someone will trust you with their life." Mitchell understood immediately. David Chun had been part of the special operations community, which meant Sarah had been exposed to aspects of military culture that most civilians never saw. She understood the brotherhood, the codes, the unspoken rules that governed how elite soldiers related to each other and to the world around them. "I see," he said. "And you're planning to continue as his primary nurse?" "If he's comfortable with that arrangement." Marcus spoke up. "She's earned my trust, sir. I prefer to continue working with her." Mitchell made his decision. "Very well, but I want regular updates on his progress, and I want to be notified immediately if there are any security concerns." After Mitchell left, Sarah and Marcus found themselves alone again, but the dynamic had shifted. The visit from his commanding officer had validated their approach and given them official backing to continue their unconventional partnership. "That went better than I expected," Marcus said. "He seems like a good commander." "He is. He's also smart enough to recognize when something is working, even if it's not by the book." Sarah smiled. "Speaking of not by the book, we should talk about your next phase of treatment. Dr. Harrison wants to start physical therapy, but she needs to know more about your baseline fitness levels." Marcus groaned. "Let me guess. She wants details about my training regimen, my typical physical capabilities, my pre-injury conditioning level." "Exactly. And I'm guessing most of that information is classified or at least sensitive." "Some of it. SEAL training standards aren't exactly public knowledge, and specific fitness requirements for Team 6 are definitely classified." Sarah pulled out a notepad. "Okay, let's figure out how to give her what she needs without revealing what you can't share." As they worked through the problem together, something important was happening that neither of them fully recognized yet. They were developing more than just a patient-nurse relationship. They were becoming partners in a complex balancing act that required trust, creativity, and mutual respect. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Dr. Harrison entered, followed by a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself as Agent Rebecca Foster from the Defense Intelligence Agency. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Foster said, I understand you've been sharing medical information related to a classified operation. I need to discuss some security protocols with you." The room fell silent. Marcus's expression hardened, and Sarah instinctively stepped closer to his bed. They had been so focused on finding a way to balance medical care with security concerns that neither had considered the possibility that their solution might attract unwanted attention from intelligence agencies. Agent Foster, Dr. Harrison said, "This is a hospital, not an interrogation facility." "I understand that, doctor. But when classified operations are discussed in medical settings, we have protocols that must be followed." Marcus looked at Sarah, then at Dr. Harrison, then back at Agent Foster. The careful balance they had worked so hard to achieve suddenly felt very fragile. "What kind of protocols?" he asked quietly. Agent Foster opened a briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "The kind that ensure operational security is maintained while allowing you to receive proper medical care. We're here to help, not to complicate things." As she spread the documents on Marcus's bedside table, Sarah realized that their small breakthrough had attracted attention from levels of government she hadn't even considered. The simple act of treating a wounded soldier was about to become something much more complex and potentially dangerous. The conversation that followed would determine not just Marcus's medical treatment, but the future of everyone involved in his care. And somewhere in Afghanistan, his teammates continued their mission, unaware that their wounded brother's recovery was about to become a matter of national security. Agent Rebecca Foster spread the documents across Marcus's bedside table with the precision of someone accustomed to dealing with classified materials. Sarah noticed that each page bore multiple security markings, some in red ink that seemed to indicate the highest levels of classification. The atmosphere in the room shifted from one of medical care to something that felt more like a high-stakes briefing. "Mr. Rodriguez," Agent Foster began, "our monitoring systems flagged unusual patterns in your medical documentation. Specifically, the modified recording procedures that have been implemented for your case." Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Agent Foster, those modifications were made for legitimate medical reasons, in consultation with the patient and his commanding officer." "I understand that, doctor. But when a special operations soldier begins discussing operational details, even in a medical context, it triggers automatic security reviews." Marcus felt the familiar tension returning to his shoulders. "I haven't discussed operational details." Agent Foster pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be transcripts. "According to our records, you've made reference to explosive device characteristics, tactical positioning during combat operations, and mission timelines. All of these fall under operational security protocols." Sarah realized with growing alarm that someone had been monitoring their conversations. "How do you have records of our discussions?" "Nurse Chun, when classified personnel receive medical treatment at military facilities, certain monitoring protocols are automatically activated. This is standard procedure for patients with your clearance level, Mr. Rodriguez." The implication hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Marcus's medical conversations had been recorded, transcribed, and analyzed by intelligence systems. The careful balance he and Sarah had worked to achieve, sharing medical information while protecting operational details, had been compromised from the beginning. "You've been listening to everything," Marcus said, his voice flat with controlled anger. "Not listening. Monitoring. There's a difference. Our systems flag keywords and phrases that might indicate security breaches. When those flags accumulate beyond certain thresholds, human analysts get involved." Dr. Harrison was struggling to process this information. "Are you telling me that patient confidentiality doesn't apply to military personnel?" "It's more complicated than that. Medical confidentiality remains in effect for health information, but discussions of classified operations fall under different regulations, regardless of the setting." Sarah looked at Marcus, seeing the walls going back up in his eyes. The trust they had built was crumbling under the weight of surveillance and bureaucracy. "So everything we've worked for has been pointless?" "Not pointless," Agent Foster said. "Actually, quite the opposite. Your approach has been remarkably successful at balancing competing priorities. That's why I'm here. She pulled out a chair and sat down, her posture shifting from authoritative to collaborative. Mr. Rodriguez, your medical progress over the past few days has been exceptional. Your psychological indicators have improved dramatically. Your cooperation with treatment has increased your recovery speed, and your overall prognosis has shifted from concerning to excellent. Marcus remained skeptical. So what's the problem? The problem is that your success is being noticed. Other special operations patients are asking why they can't have the same level of personalized care. Medical staff are requesting training on your modified protocols. And command structures are wondering if this approach should be standardized across military medicine. Dr. Harrison began to understand the implications. You're saying that our solution for one patient might need to become policy for many others. Exactly. But before that can happen, we need to ensure that the approach can be scaled without creating security vulnerabilities. Agent Foster turned to Sarah. Nurse Chun, your background makes you uniquely qualified for this type of work. Your brother's service record indicates exposure to multiple special operations units, which means you have cultural knowledge that most medical personnel lack. Sarah felt a chill. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that you might be interested in specialized training that would allow you to work with classified patients on a regular basis. Your success with Mr. Rodriguez indicates natural aptitude for this type of work. Marcus saw where this was heading and didn't like it. You want to recruit her. I want to offer her an opportunity to expand her impact. Nurse Chun, there are hundreds of special operations soldiers receiving medical care at facilities around the world. Many of them face the same conflicts between security requirements and medical needs that Mr. Rodriguez experienced. You've demonstrated a unique ability to bridge that gap. Sarah looked at Marcus, then at Dr. Harrison, trying to understand the full implications of what was being offered. What would that involve? Agent Foster opened another folder. Enhanced security clearance, specialized training in operational security protocols, and assignment to a newly created program that provides medical support for classified patients. You would still be a nurse, but you would work exclusively with patients whose cases involve national security considerations. And if I'm not interested, then you continue in your current role with the understanding that your interactions with Mr. Rodriguez have been documented and analyzed, and that you now have exposure to classified information that requires ongoing security monitoring. The threat was subtle but clear. Sarah's life had already been changed by her involvement with Marcus's case. She could either embrace that change and gain some control over it, or she could find herself perpetually under scrutiny for having been exposed to sensitive information. Dr. Harrison recognized the impossible position Sarah was being placed in. This seems like coercion. It's not coercion, it's reality, Agent Foster replied. Nurse Chun is now part of a classified program, whether she chooses to be or not. I'm offering her the chance to make that involvement beneficial rather than restrictive. Marcus had remained quiet during this exchange, but he could see the trap that was closing around Sarah. Her moment of compassion, her decision to use her brother's knowledge to help a wounded soldier, was being turned into a career-defining choice she had never sought. What happens to my current patients? Sarah asked. Your current assignment would be transferred to other qualified personnel. Your new role would initially be based here at Walter Reed, working with special operations patients as they come through the system. And Mr. Rodriguez? Agent Foster smiled. Mr. Rodriguez would continue to be your patient until his recovery is complete. In fact, his case would serve as a model for developing protocols for similar situations. Sarah realized she was being maneuvered into a corner, but she also recognized that this might be an opportunity to help other soldiers who face the same impossible choice between healing and security that Marcus had confronted. I need time to think about this. Of course, but I should mention that the program is being established with or without your participation. The question is whether you want to help shape it or whether it will be developed by people who lack your insights. After Agent Foster left, the room felt different. The easy collaboration between Sarah and Marcus had been replaced by an awareness that they were being watched, analyzed, and managed by systems larger than themselves. Their personal breakthrough had become a matter of policy, Their relationship transformed into a case study. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. "I never meant for you to get pulled into this." Sarah sat down in the chair Agent Foster had vacated. "It's not your fault. I made the choice to use information I probably shouldn't have known." "Your brother's information?" "More than that. David didn't just give me recognition codes. He taught me how to read people, how to understand the culture, how to recognize when someone needed help but couldn't ask for it. I think he knew that someday I might need those skills." Marcus studied her face. "You think he planned this somehow?" "I think he understood that military families are connected in ways that don't always follow official channels. Maybe he hoped that connection might help someone someday." Dr. Harrison had been listening to this exchange with growing concern. "Sarah, you don't have to make this decision based on guilt or obligation. Your first responsibility is to yourself." "Is it though? Because if I don't take this position, who will? Someone who doesn't understand what these soldiers go through? Someone who doesn't recognize the signs that Marcus was showing when he first arrived?" Marcus realized that Sarah was wrestling with the same impossible choice he had faced: sacrifice personal preferences for the greater good, or prioritize self-preservation at the potential cost of others. "There's another option," he said suddenly. Both women looked at him. "You take the position, but on your terms. Use the opportunity to advocate for patients, not just serve the system. If they want your expertise, make them pay for it with real protections for the soldiers you'll be treating." Sarah considered this. "You think I have that kind of leverage?" "I think you have more leverage than you realize. They came to you, not the other way around. They need what you can provide, which means you can set conditions." Dr. Harrison nodded. "Marcus is right. If your approach is unique enough to warrant creating a new program, then you're in a position to influence how that program operates." Sarah spent the next several hours walking the hospital corridors, thinking about her brother, about Marcus, about the dozens of other wounded soldiers she had treated who might have been hiding similar struggles behind walls of silence. The decision felt overwhelming, but gradually she began to see it not as a trap, but as an opportunity to honor her brother's memory while expanding her ability to help others. When she returned to room 314 that evening, she found Marcus reading a book that Colonel Mitchell had brought him. He looked up when she entered. "Have you decided?" "I think so. But I want to ask you something first." Marcus set aside his book. "What's that?" "If you were in my position, what would you do?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I'd do what I always do. I'd ask myself what serves the mission and the men who depend on it. And in this case, the mission is helping soldiers like me get better without compromising their brothers who are still fighting. And the answer to that mission is you." Sarah smiled. "Then, I guess I have my answer." The next morning, she called Agent Foster and accepted the position, but with conditions. She wanted input on program protocols, guarantees that patient welfare would always take precedence over security convenience, and assurance that the program would be designed to help soldiers, not just manage them. To her surprise, Agent Foster agreed to all her conditions. It seemed that Sarah's leverage had been even greater than she'd imagined. As she prepared to transition into her new role, Sarah realized that her life had been permanently changed by 4 simple words spoken in a hospital room. But instead of resenting that change, she was beginning to embrace it as a chance to make a difference on a scale she had never imagined possible. Marcus's recovery continued to accelerate under their established routine, but now their conversations had a different weight. They weren't just patient and nurse anymore. They were partners in developing an approach that might help hundreds of other soldiers facing similar struggles. The foundation they had built through trust and understanding was about to become the cornerstone of something much larger. And somewhere in Afghanistan, Marcus's teammates continued their mission, still unaware that their wounded brother's recovery was reshaping the future of military medicine. 2 weeks into Sarah's new role as a specialized nurse for classified patients, the program she had helped design faced its first major test. 3 soldiers from different special operations units had been admitted to Walter Reed within a span of 48 hours, each presenting the same troubling pattern of resistance to medical care that Marcus had initially displayed. The first was Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison from Delta Force, admitted with severe burns from an IED explosion in Iraq. Like Marcus, he had accepted minimal treatment while maintaining complete silence about the circumstances of his injuries. The second was Petty Officer Lisa Chun, no relation to Sarah, despite the shared surname, a Navy EOD specialist who had been injured during a classified operation she refused to discuss. The third was Captain Miguel Santos from Army Special Forces, whose multiple gunshot wounds told a story he wouldn't share with anyone in the medical staff. Sarah found herself moving between these three patients, using the techniques she had developed with Marcus to establish trust and open communication. But each case presented unique challenges that forced her to expand and refine her approach. Jake Morrison proved to be the most difficult. His burns were severe enough to require immediate skin grafts, but his refusal to provide details about how he'd been injured made it impossible for doctors to determine if he'd been exposed to chemical agents that might complicate treatment. When Sarah attempted to use the recognition code that had worked with Marcus, Jake's response was swift and hostile. "Who the hell told you that phrase?" he demanded. "Someone who understood what it meant," Sarah replied carefully. "That's not an answer. That's classified information, and you're a civilian nurse. Start talking, or I start making calls." Sarah realized that different units used different protocols, and what had worked with a Navy SEAL might not work with Delta Force. She needed a different approach. "My brother was David Chun, Army Special Forces. He died in Syria 3 years ago during Operation Inherent Resolve." Jake's expression shifted slightly. "I knew David Chun. Good operator. He taught me things before he died. Things he probably shouldn't have shared with his sister." Jake studied her face for several minutes, searching for deception or manipulation. Finally, he spoke again. "What kind of things?" "Recognition codes, unit traditions, ways to identify friendlies when official channels aren't available. And you think that gives you clearance to know about classified operations?" "I think that gives me understanding of why you might choose to suffer rather than risk compromising your team." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "My team is still downrange. Our target is still active. Anything I say about my injuries could compromise ongoing operations." Sarah pulled up a chair beside his bed. "Then, let's find a way to treat your injuries without compromising your operations." The conversation that followed was more complex than her initial breakthrough with Marcus. Jake's injuries were more severe, his operational security concerns more immediate, and his trust more difficult to earn. But gradually, Sarah was able to establish the same kind of collaborative relationship that had worked with Marcus. The real revelation came when she was working with Petty Officer Lisa Chun. Unlike the others, Lisa was willing to talk about her injuries, but she had a different kind of secret. As Sarah was reviewing her medication chart, Lisa asked an unexpected question. "How many of us are you treating?" "What do you mean?" "Special operations patients with classified injuries. How many are in this program you're running?" Sarah was surprised by the question. "Currently 3, including you." "What?" Lisa was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "Because there's something you need to know about why we're all here." "What do you mean?" Lisa glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. "We weren't injured in 3 separate operations. We were all injured in the same operation." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "That's impossible. You're from different units, different services." "Different services, same mission. Joint Special Operations Task Force. What happened to us was connected." This information completely reframed Sarah's understanding of the situation. If these 3 soldiers had been injured in the same operation, then their separate refusals to discuss their injuries weren't just about individual operational security. They were about protecting a larger mission that involved multiple units working together. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Because the mission isn't over. Our units are still coordinating operations based on intelligence we gathered. If the wrong people figure out that we were all part of the same task force, they might be able to piece together information that could compromise everything." Sarah realized she was now in possession of information that went far beyond her clearance level or her need to know. 3 separate patients had become 3 pieces of a larger puzzle, and she was the only person who saw all the pieces. That evening, She found herself in an impossible position. Protocol demanded that she report this information to Agent Foster, but doing so might expose operational details that her patient had trusted her to protect. On the other hand, keeping the information secret might compromise her new position and put other patients at risk. She decided to consult with Marcus, who had become both a patient and an informal advisor as she navigated the complexities of her new role. "You're asking me to help you figure out how to handle classified information that affects people I've never met," Marcus said when she explained the situation. "I'm asking someone I trust to help me think through an impossible situation." Marcus considered this. First question, does this information change how you treat any of your patients? Not directly. Second question, does this information put anyone in immediate danger? I don't think so. Third question, does sharing this information serve any purpose other than satisfying bureaucratic requirements? Sarah thought about this. I'm not sure. Then, maybe the question isn't whether you should report it, but whether you should verify it first. This suggestion opened up a new possibility that Sarah hadn't considered. Instead of immediately reporting what Lisa had told her, she could carefully investigate whether it was true, and, if so, what the implications might be. Over the next several days, Sarah began to piece together a picture that was far more complex than she had initially understood. Small details from each patient's case began to connect in ways that suggested Lisa had been telling the truth. The timing of their injuries, the types of wounds they had sustained, even the geographic regions they had been deployed to all pointed toward a coordinated operation. But the more she learned, the more dangerous her position became. She was now in possession of information that could potentially compromise ongoing operations involving multiple special operations units. Every conversation with her patients added more pieces to a puzzle she wasn't supposed to be solving. The situation reached a crisis point when Captain Miguel Santos, the Army Special Forces officer, suffered complications from his gunshot wounds. An infection had developed that required immediate surgery, but the surgical team needed to know if he had been exposed to any unusual contaminants that might affect treatment. Santos was unconscious from fever, unable to provide the information himself. Standard protocol would require Sarah to contact his command for medical history, but doing so might expose operational details that could compromise the mission Lisa had described. Sarah found herself facing the same impossible choice her patients had been confronting. Choose between immediate medical needs and longer-term security requirements. She made a decision that would define the rest of her career in military medicine. Instead of following standard protocol, she contacted Agent Foster and requested an emergency meeting. "Agent Foster," she said when they met in a secure conference room, "I need to discuss a situation that involves classified information, but I need guarantees about how that information will be handled." Agent Foster raised an eyebrow. "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves ongoing operations, multiple special operations units, and patient safety." "Nurse Chun, are you saying you've discovered information that affects national security?" "I'm saying I've discovered information that might affect national security, and I need guidance on how to handle it responsibly." What followed was the most intense briefing of Sarah's life. She explained what she had learned from her patients, how she had verified the connections between their cases, and why she believed their injuries were part of a larger operational picture that was still unfolding. Agent Foster listened without interruption, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. When Sarah finished, there was a long silence. "Nurse Chun," Agent Foster finally said, "you've stumbled onto something that very few people are supposed to know about. I figured that out. The question now is what to do about it." Agent Foster made a phone call to someone whose name wasn't mentioned and whose voice Sarah couldn't hear. The conversation lasted 15 minutes and involved a lot of military jargon and code words that Sarah didn't understand. When the call ended, Agent Foster turned back to Sarah with an expression that was both impressed and concerned. "Your instincts were correct," she said. "The 3 patients you're treating were indeed part of the same operation, and that operation is still ongoing. What does that mean for their treatment? It means that your approach to handling their care has been more important than you realized. By treating them separately while protecting their collective security, you've prevented a potential intelligence breach that could have compromised dozens of operators still in the field. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. So what happens now? Now you get read into programs you never knew existed, and you discover that your role in this system is much larger than anyone initially explained. Agent Foster pulled out a new set of documents, these marked with security classifications Sarah had never seen before. Welcome to the real program, Nurse Chun. The one where your unique skills aren't just helpful, they're essential to national security. As Sarah looked at the documents spread before her, she realized that her simple act of compassion toward Marcus had led her into a world she had never imagined. Her brother's legacy, her own instincts, and her patient's trust had combined to make her an unexpected guardian of some of the military's most sensitive secrets. And somewhere around the world, operators from multiple special operations units continued missions that depended, in part, on a nurse's ability to help wounded warriors heal without compromising the brothers and sisters they had left behind. 6 months after Marcus Rodriguez first arrived at Walter Reed, Sarah Chun found herself standing in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon, looking at a wall-mounted display that showed the global impact of the program she had helped create. Red dots marked locations where specialized medical protocols were being implemented for classified patients. Green lines connected those locations to successful treatment outcomes. Blue symbols indicated operations that had been completed without compromise thanks to secure medical procedures. The numbers were staggering. Over 300 special operations soldiers had received treatment under the new protocols. Mission security had been maintained in every case. Recovery times had improved by an average of 37%. Most importantly, no operations had been compromised due to medical information leaks. Nurse Chun, said General Patricia Williams, the commanding officer of military medical operations, your approach to treating classified patients has become the standard for special operations medicine worldwide. Sarah studied the display, still amazed by how far things had come from that first conversation with Marcus in room 314. I never imagined it would grow to this scale. Neither did we, admitted Agent Foster, who had become Sarah's primary liaison with the intelligence community. What started as a solution for one difficult patient has revolutionized how we handle the intersection of medical care and operational security. But Sarah knew that behind every dot on that map was a story like Marcus's, a wounded warrior caught between the need to heal and the obligation to protect teammates still in danger. The statistics were impressive, but the human cost of the conflicts that created these patients remained sobering. Marcus himself had become a symbol of the program's success. His physical recovery had been complete within 3 months, but he had chosen to remain involved as a liaison between medical staff and special operations units. His insights helped train new medical personnel, and his presence helped other patients understand that recovery was possible without betraying their oath to their brothers and sisters in arms. There's something else we need to discuss, General Williams said, interrupting Sarah's thoughts. The program's success has attracted attention from our allies. The British SAS, Australian CSR, and Canadian JDF-2 have all requested training on these protocols. Sarah looked at Agent Foster. Are we talking about expanding internationally? We're talking about you leading an international training program, General Williams replied. Teaching allied medical personnel how to treat their own special operations patients using techniques you developed. The offer was both flattering and overwhelming. Sarah had gone from treating individual patients to potentially influencing special operations medicine across multiple countries. But the responsibility felt enormous. What would that involve? Agent Foster opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. 6 months of international assignments, working with allied medical facilities, training their personnel, and adapting protocols to different operational cultures. And after that, General Williams smiled. After that, you return to head the new Department of Special Operations Medicine at Walter Reed. Your own department, your own staff, your own research budget. Sarah looked at the folder without opening it. 6 months earlier, she had been a rookie nurse trying to help one difficult patient. Now she was being offered the chance to lead a medical specialty that didn't exist before she created it. Can I think about it? Of course, General Williams said. But I should mention that your first patient specifically requested to speak with you about this decision. Sarah found Marcus in the same room where they had first established their partnership, though he was no longer a patient. He was visiting Jake Morrison, the Delta Force operator who had become Sarah's second major success story. Jake was scheduled to be discharged the following day, fully recovered and cleared to return to duty. Heard you're being offered the world, Marcus said when Sarah entered the room. Something like that. Jake looked up from the paperwork he was completing. You should take it. Why? Because what you do works, Jake replied. And there are a lot of people out there who need it to work for them too. Marcus nodded. Jake's right. You've created something that saves lives and protects missions. That's bigger than any one person. Sarah sat down in the chair she had occupied so many times during Marcus's recovery. I'm scared I won't be able to replicate what happened here. You don't need to replicate it, Marcus said. You need to adapt it. Every patient is different. Every situation is unique. But the core principle, treating people with understanding and respect while protecting what they need to protect, that's universal. Jake finished his paperwork and looked directly at Sarah. You know what convinced me to trust you? What? It wasn't the recognition codes or the military knowledge. It was the fact that you listened to what I needed instead of just following procedures. Marcus added, that's what makes this program work. It's not about having all the right answers. It's about asking the right questions and being willing to find new solutions. Sarah realized they were both right. The success of her approach hadn't come from following a predetermined method, but from being flexible enough to meet each patient where they were and find ways to honor both their medical needs and their security obligations. There's something else you should know, Marcus said. My team came back last week. All of them safe and successful. The mission we were protecting when I got injured, it worked. Partly because I was able to heal without compromising their position. This was the first time Sarah had heard the outcome of the operation that had started everything. That's wonderful. It's more than wonderful. It means that what we did here had real consequences for real people in real danger. Your willingness to find a different way to do things helped bring my teammates home safely. Jake stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. My team completed their mission too. Same story, able to maintain operational security while getting proper medical care. As Sarah shook his hand, she understood that her decision wasn't just about career advancement or professional development. It was about expanding a capability that had proven its worth in saving lives and protecting those who put themselves in harm's way to protect others. That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the international assignment offer. Her father, a retired engineer, was impressed by the professional opportunity. Her mother, a high school teacher, was proud but worried about the dangers of working with military patients involved in classified operations. Do you remember what David used to say? Her mother asked during their conversation. That the best way to honor the fallen is to protect the living. Sarah did remember. It had been one of David's favorite phrases during his last visit home before deploying to Syria. At the time, she had thought he was talking about his mission overseas. Now she realized he might have been talking about something larger. Maybe this is how I protect the living, Sarah said. By helping them heal without forcing them to choose between their health and their duty. Her father's voice was thoughtful. Your brother would be proud of what you've accomplished. I think he would want me to do more. The next morning, Sarah walked into General Williams's office and accepted the international assignment. But she had conditions, just as she had when Agent Foster first recruited her. I want Marcus Rodriguez assigned as my military liaison for the international program, she said. His insights into special operations culture are essential for adapting protocols to different units. Agreed. I want Jake Morrison involved in training new medical personnel. His perspective as a patient who experienced the process can help others understand what we're trying to accomplish. Also agreed. And I want assurance that this program will always prioritize patient welfare over bureaucratic convenience. The moment it becomes about managing soldiers instead of healing them, I walk away. General Williams smiled. Those are exactly the conditions I was hoping you would set. As Sarah prepared for her new role, she found herself thinking about the chain of events that had brought her to this point. A moment of compassion toward one wounded soldier had grown into a program that was changing military medicine around the world. Her brother's legacy, preserved in recognition codes and cultural knowledge, had become a tool for healing that honored both medical ethics and military duty. Marcus's recovery had been complete, but their partnership was just beginning. Jake Morrison, Lisa Chun, Miguel Santos, and dozens of other patients had become advocates for an approach that recognized the complexity of treating warriors who carried secrets as heavy as their weapons. The program Sarah had helped create wasn't just about medical procedures or security protocols. It was about understanding that healing sometimes required more than medicine. It required trust, respect, and recognition that the people seeking help were whole human beings with obligations that extended beyond themselves. As her plane lifted off from Andrews Air Force Base 6 weeks later, carrying her toward her first international assignment in London, Sarah looked out the window at the landscape below. Somewhere down there, special operations soldiers were preparing for missions that would take them into harm's way. When they were wounded, when they needed help but couldn't ask for it in traditional ways, there would be medical personnel trained to understand their dilemma and find ways to help them heal without forcing them to betray their oath to their teammates. Marcus Rodriguez had taught her that sometimes the most profound healing comes not from fixing what's broken, but from understanding why someone might choose to remain broken rather than risk breaking others. That understanding had become the foundation of a new approach to military medicine, one that honored both the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm and the warrior's oath to leave no one behind. The recognition code that had opened the door to Marcus's trust, Frogman walking backward, had become a symbol of something larger. The idea that sometimes the key to helping someone isn't knowing the right procedures, but knowing the right words to prove you understand their world. As the plane crossed into international airspace, Sarah opened the folder containing her new assignment briefings. Each document represented another opportunity to extend the reach of compassionate, secure medical care to warriors around the world. Each mission would bring new challenges, new patients, and new opportunities to prove that healing and duty didn't have to be enemies. David Chin's legacy lived on in his sister's work, in the soldiers she helped heal, and in the missions that succeeded because wounded warriors could trust their medical caregivers to understand the weight of secrets and the cost of trust. The brotherhood he had introduced her to had welcomed her as family, and she had helped that family find new ways to take care of its own. The revolution in special operations medicine that began with one nurse's willingness to listen and one patient's courage to trust had become something neither of them could have imagined. But its success measured itself not in awards or recognition, but in the simple fact that warriors could come home, heal completely, and return to protect others without ever having to choose between their health and their honor.